Hello everyone, my name is Professor Warren, and today we'll be talking about the writing process as well as how to plan and draft your paper. Now, I had you guys read the planning and drafting, but I thought I'd give you a little bit of a break from all the reading and just go ahead and explain the writing process to you. And I think honestly it makes it a little bit more interactive and probably easier to understand, rather than planning and drafting, which is a little bit more straightforward. So the first part will be all about the writing process, and then the second part will be based on the planning and drafting assigned reading. So let's get started. So what is the writing process? Well, it's in the name, right? It's the process you go about when you start writing. And it's important to note that while your writing process will be different from your classmates and it will be different from myself, it doesn't mean it's wrong. Everyone has their own process. So use this as more of a framework to help you better improve your writing if you either don't have a good process or your process works for you, but maybe not efficiently. So, as we understand it, the writing process mostly includes a series of steps that I have listed here. Pre-writing, research, drafting, revising, and then editing and proofreading. Now, this is by all means, not the only way to go about the writing process. However, these are just sort of names we give to describe what it is that we're doing when we go to write. So just be aware of that, right? It doesn't mean you have to do all of these, but it's just sort of giving terminology out in the things that we are doing during this process. It's also important to note that although I have it laid out here, and I'm going to go through them in order, it does not mean the writing process is linear, right? So for instance, it doesn't mean that everyone goes from top to bottom, pre-writing, research, drafting, revising, or editing, right? Very much the writing process is recursive, and recursive means that you honestly tend to go back to steps, skip steps, maybe, for instance, drafting a paper, right? You write out your paper and then you go to the revising where you sort of fix up the big organizational issues, and then you might go back to drafting again, right? And then maybe you're drafting and realize, oh, I don't know about this, topic that I need to know about. Then you might go back to the research stage, do some research, and then you go back to draft and you revise it, right? And you might do that multiple times. So don't think that, oh, because I'm not going in a linear order, therefore I'm not good at writing. That's not the case, right? Humans tend to not really do things linear, right? We tend to go back to things. That's why if you've ever taken a timed essay exam, they're not a good accurate predictor of your writing, right? Because it's not giving you the time to be recursive in your writing process. That's why I don't give timed essays, and why a lot of other English teachers and professors are phasing that out. It really isn't a good accurate indicator of your writing, because the time that you have, you're probably just going to want to put things down so you have it down rather than actually do what writing requires you to do. So what we do in class, right, where we make multiple essays and I give you weeks to do it, that is letting you have time to do this writing process. And as somebody who is a professional, right, in this field, this writing process also doesn't last a day for me. It often lasts months for me, right? So don't be afraid of that. So let's talk about pre-writing. Again, I like to break words down into their parts, and so we have pre and we have writing, right? So before writing. The pre-writing stage, think of it as your preparation stage, right? I'm asking you here, what are a few ways you prepare before writing? I personally like to, lay things out. I like to be in a particular space. I like good atmosphere before I write. That's some pre-writing. As well as I like to brainstorm. I like to jot things down. I like to make visuals and connect ideas physically using a pen. Pre-writing has all of these steps, and in the planning and drafting phase, I'll go over some more things you can do during this pre-writing stage. But for now, pre-writing is all those things you do before you start writing. And I have one of the strategies that I like to do during this pre-writing stage. Again, we'll go over specific strategies here in a bit, but some of the things you should do during this pre-writing stage is consider your rhetorical situation. Essentially, consider your writing situation. So ask yourself, what was the purpose of this piece I'm supposed to compose, right? Who is my audience? What do they know? What do they not know? What is the topic? Am I well versed in this topic? Do I need to learn more about it? Also, the writer. Again, whether you're reading someone else's writing or you yourself are writing, ask yourself, what is the purpose that this writer is trying to convey? What is it that they're trying to get across? And again, if you're the writer, ask yourself, what am I trying to get across, right? What is my purpose? And the context. So very much in the digital age, people are taken out of context all of the time, right? The situation that surrounds them. So also consider your context, right? What is the context around this paper, right? It's academically is your context, right? But it's important to consider that, right? What are then the requirements of an academic paper? The next stage is research. Now again, research is one of those maybe, right, in your writing process. For instance, if I'm drafting a email to a student, right, I don't think I'm going to do research. But there may be times I need to actually go and do some research for a academic paper, right, because I might really enjoy a subject, but there's just some things I don't know about it, right? The research stage is mostly important, or at least probably will pertain to you anytime you do an argumentative essay, so you're trying to persuade someone, an informative essay, and just various other types of persuasive writing, right? It's good to do research in any sort of persuasive writing because, ultimately pulling in other people's words and their they say, right, can bolster your own argument, right? And what really happens during this research stage is a lot of inquiry. So again, you're likely asking questions to yourself like, oh, I now understand, I don't know, the Guatemalan Civil War, right? But how did it get this way, right? What led to this? How was the U.S. involved, right? So during this research stage, you're often asking inquiry and you're often going back to the pre-writing stage, right? Listing things down, thinking through ideas. So the research stage, while it is looking up information, it's also doing some pre-writing there, right? Where you're sort of going through, trying to figure things out, gather everything that you need. And then once you know what you're going to talk about, you've pre-wrote a bit, you've maybe researched, now you're putting those ideas to paper, or in the digital age, we're putting, our ideas to pixels on a screen, right? And during this phase, I highly suggest that you just focus on trying to explain and support your ideas fully. So during the drafting stage, don't focus on your grammar unless, of course, you accidentally misspell something, right? And you just quickly fix that. But I would not try to nitpick your paper at this point. Just get those ideas down and try to explain them to the best of your ability. Because it's better to have a piece of writing that is coherent and it makes good points, more so one that maybe uses the wrong form of your, right? I'd rather have a paper that made sense but has grammar issues versus a paper that doesn't make sense but it's beautifully, edited and proofread, right? So very much the drafting is one of the most crucial steps, right? Get what it is that you want down, even if you don't know if it's going to work out by the end of the paper. Get the ideas down. Make sure you're explicating on those ideas. And then in the next stage, you can worry about that, the grammar issues and the, sense. But at this point, just concentrate on getting those ideas down because that is the hardest part. Get your ideas down, explain yourself fully. I know during the drafting stage, I often don't start with my introduction, right? I will start with a section of my paper that I feel very strongly about, that I know I can write well. And I'll do that and then skip around my paper and do the parts that I find to be more challenging. And that could be maybe the way you write, right? Maybe you start with your second body paragraph because you think it's really good, and then you save that introduction to the end. I hate writing introductions to papers because I'm like, let's just go ahead and talk about these things, right? So very much during this drafting stage, just get the ideas down on paper, and then in the revising stage, now you can start to make this paper the way it needs to be. This is one of the most challenging. While I said drafting is hard, which it is, right? I think the revising stage is the most difficult. This is where you need to put take off your writer cap and put your reader cap on. And what I mean by this is you have to approach your work as if you did not write it. And the reason you have to do it is because you understand what it is that you're saying, right? Because you wrote it. But you have to put yourself in the shoes of someone who has never read this work, right? And see where there are issues in the paper, right? Does it flow? Is it coherent? Do you explicate or explain yourself fully, right? If you're reading it and you're like, if I didn't know what the Guatemalan Civil War was, would I know this thing, or would I know that thing, or would I be persuaded, right? Again, just pretend you never wrote this. You're somebody with fresh eyes. Some of the advice I would give in how to be, so quote unquote, more like a reader writer at this point, so again, reading it critically as if you're someone new, is I would do some of these things. One, take a break and come back later. Oftentimes your mind is in overdrive after you've written and you are still in that mindset. So taking a break, coming back at it with fresh eyes, you're likely to catch something you didn't catch before. Reading it out loud to yourself or someone you trust. So read it out loud. Sometimes, again, you can hear things that you may not have caught when you wrote those things. Or you can read it to somebody you trust. I would say don't read it to someone who's just going to tell you, oh, you're great and everything you do is wonderful, right? Those people won't provide feedback. But read it to someone you know will not make fun of you, but will give you constructive criticism, right? Maybe read it to a family member, maybe a significant other, somebody, right? And then ask them thought-provoking questions. Ask them, hey, what was my thesis statement? What was my purpose for this paper? What were my supporting claims? Were you convinced? What conclusion did you get? If you find that they can't answer that, that should clue you in that, hey, I did not explain this well enough. Or if you don't want to read it out loud to someone, give it to somebody to read, right? That person you trust, let them look over it for you and then ask them those same questions. Or again, visit the writing lab. Your college money is going to pay their salaries, so go use them. They are there to help you. So, say you wrote, you drafted, you revised it, you went back and drafted, you revised it, and now you're like, okay, it's pretty good. It's nearly close to being done. At this point is when you look for those grammatical or syntax errors. This is the actual editing and proofreading, right? So if you use the wrong form of your, you go back and fix it now, right? Or if you're bad at doing quotations or in-text citations, you go and fix that here. It's almost like the icing on the cake, or like seeing the finish line at the end of a race, right? I personally love to do my editing and proofreading at the very last, part of my paper, because it really makes me feel good, and it's almost like that cherry on top. Now again, use the writing lab to help you if you're not very good at grammar. Easy Writer, again, this is the textbook that A&T uses, but instead of Easy Writer, go to PurdueOwl.com. They will have help with grammar, as well as Grammarly, right? Adding the Grammarly extension. Again, Grammarly is not always 100% correct, but it can catch those really silly mistakes that you don't want to miss out on. So I wanted to share my writing process. Now again, depending on what I'm writing, how I feel, and again, this is over days, my writing process differs. But this is one I would say is my writing process on average, which is I pre-write, I do research, I pre-write, and then I draft, and then I research. And why I do this is usually when I'm drafting, I realize, oh, it might be beneficial to find a source to help corroborate what I'm saying, or oh, I started writing this thing and I realized I have no idea what I'm talking about, right? So usually I'm doing drafting, research, and then more drafting, revising, and then I edit and proofread. That's like my cherry on top, and then I submit it to whatever I'm submitting it to. That's usually my writing process. And I want to sort of stress here, right, that this draft, right, this one between the pre-writing and the research stage, that draft is, in part in my French, but it is crappy, right? It's that crappy first draft. But I know that every time I draft and revise and draft and revise, I get a crappy first paper. And then I get a less crappy but still crappy second paper. And then the third one's a bit better. And the fourth one, and so, however many drafts you need, right? Maybe you rewrite that paper 5 or 6 times, and that's when it starts getting to the place it needs to be, right? Don't think that, you can do it all the first time, because likely you can't. Even professional writers usually can't write that golden sentence, that perfect explanation the first time. It likely is a bunch of crappy first drafts, and I promise you, if you saw some of my first drafts, you would question whether I'm qualified to be a professor. Really, every time you revise, that paper becomes just less crappy. It becomes where it needs, it becomes the thing that it needs to be. So, now that we've sort of discussed the writing process, let's now move into the planning and drafting phase. So, now that you understand what the writing process is, now you can start to actually get more details on how to explore, plan, and draft. So, as I said, right, we had the pre-writing, the research, the drafting, the revision, and the editing and proofreading stages, right? These are sort of the more condensed ways to think about the ways in which you plan and explore your paper, which is, again, the pre-writing stage or the exploring stage, however you want to think about it, the planning stage and the drafting stage. This is essentially the more crucial elements in how to plan and draft the paper. This isn't to say revision and editing and proofreading aren't important, but these are sort of breaking down the ones people spend more time on, which is exploring and planning, which is pre-writing, and then drafting. So exploring or pre-writing is choosing your topic, right? Which may come easy for some people and may be more difficult for other people. Whatever your topic is, if you're at liberty to choose, some teachers and professors won't let you choose. I'm very much one of, I steer you in a direction, but ultimately you have choice. So for this stage, you want to choose something, if you can, that holds your interest, right? You don't want to get writer's fatigue. There have been many papers I've done that I really didn't have much of a choice on, and I promise you, by the time you submit that paper, you never want to see that topic again in your life. So choose something that holds your interest. This can also be a time where maybe, as a freshman likely, you don't know what it is you want to do with your degree. Maybe you're undecided, or maybe you've picked a degree that your parents sort of want you to pick, or maybe you pick something you think might be cool, but you don't know. You definitely can either pick a topic that interests you or pick a topic related to that degree field you either maybe want to do or are doing and are unsure. You can sort of explore that degree and what it has to offer. So I would say, hey, pick something related to your degree, because that's going to be useful to you. Or just pick something that you really like to do or something that interests you. So, as I said in the pre-writing stage, I talk more about the ways in which to come up with ideas. And by all means, these aren't the only ones, but hopefully it may help you. The first one is brainstorming, right? So again, either writing down a list of ideas, right? And maybe, narrowing it down to 3 that you might want to do. Or maybe this is where you start to, do Venn diagrams, right? Where you list topics and then you make lines that connect them and see the connections that are made there and a possible research question that could come from it. There's also free writing. So the way I do free writing is I set a timer on my phone for 10 minutes. And for 10 minutes, I write out whatever comes in my head. I don't edit, I don't proofread, I just write. And at the end of the 10 minutes, I go back and see what I came up with. And then I see, hey, this could work. Or, hey, it's good, but how could I improve this, right? So maybe doing free writing could help you. Doodling. So again, if you're somebody who's like me, who always has to have their hands busy, I often doodle while I'm thinking of things, so, and some people find it really annoying. It's not like I'm not listening, I just gotta have my hand doing something. So maybe you're somebody that, while you're drawing or, using your hands in some way, shape, or form, it could help you to come up with an idea, right? Where you're sort of focusing on a task, but you're kind of, in your own headspace and you try to think of ideas. Clustering. So again, sort of that Venn diagram connection thing. Maybe you put ideas together and lump them together to see what sort of questions can come from that. Sort of similar to what we've discussed. Have conversations. So again, talk to your friends, your family. Say, hey, I'm thinking of doing this. What do you think? Usually your friends will say, oh, that's really cool. Or they'll say things such as, oh, well, have you heard about this? Or did you think about that? Or, I think it works, but why don't you do something like this, right? Having conversations, while that might not seem like pre-writing, it definitely is. It's exploring a topic. There have been many times I've talked with fellow colleagues and I'll tell them my research question. They'll say, oh, have you read this book? It could help you. And likely I have. And I go, well, thank you. And I write it down to go read it and see if it'll help me. Or you can have conversations with professionals in the field. So again, if you're taking my English class and maybe you're into nursing, you may go ask your professor after class saying, hey, I got to do a research paper and I'm interested in this because it's related to nursing, right? Do you think it's a good topic for a paper? And likely they can help steer you in the right direction. As well as ask questions. So again, consider that rhetorical situation. And that's what I mentioned in the earlier lecture, right? In the pre-writing, right? Ask those questions. Who is the writer, which is you, and what are they trying to accomplish? What is the purpose of your paper, right? What is the context around it? Ask those questions and then see, okay, do I have a good understanding? Can I make a research question from this? So, this is also your research question will eventually become your working thesis, right? So once you have a question that you want to explore, you then turn it into a working thesis. We'll go over more about working theses versus a thesis statement towards the end of the semester, but essentially a working thesis is you have a topic and a comment on that topic. And while working thesis isn't perfect, it's enough that you can start to do research and you can start to draft that paper. So, a working thesis, in a way, is like a thesis statement, right? The purpose of your paper, your main argument. But again, it doesn't have to be fully clear at this point. It can just be enough to get you started. Again, the same characteristics apply to a working thesis, right? Make sure it's interesting, it relates to your intended audience, it's as specific as you can make it at this stage, and it's manageable, right? You don't want a thesis statement such as, in this paper, I will discuss the history of U.S. sexism, right? If your paper is only supposed to be 5 pages, you can't cover the entire history of United States and sexism, right? Because you have to start way at the beginning of the United States' founding. And then you have to cover sexism in the workplace, sexism as it relates to women of color, sexism in educational institutions. And you have to do that for every decade. That's impossible, right? So make sure that, again, your working thesis, you like it, it fits your intended audience, it's as specific as you can make it at this point, and it's manageable, it's focused. Now, again, we'll go over more of this later in the semester, but just to let you know, a thesis statement is more narrow, it's focused, it's concise, and again, it's the main argument of your paper. This is the cleaned up version. What makes this a thesis statement versus a working thesis is that a thesis statement also has a topic and a comment on that topic, but it usually has 3 supporting claims. So 3 reasons why we should agree with that person's educated assumption. A good thesis statement will meet each of these 7 requirements. Again, it will be clear, it'll be coherent, we can understand it. It's focused, meaning it's manageable, it's not trying to cover huge swaths of history, for example. It's concise. So again, a good thesis statement and a working thesis, honestly, should be between 1 to 2 sentences, right? If it's concise and it's 1 to 2 sentences, you know you have something that is thoroughly expressed. Whereas if you have a thesis statement or a working thesis at 5, 6, 7 sentences long, that's either cluing you in that you don't know really what it is you're talking about, and so you have to keep adding words to help your audience understand, or it's indicating, hey, this person's trying to put too much into their paper. So just be aware of that. Complexity. So again, your thesis statement shouldn't just be yes or no, right? Who cares, right? That's an easy Google search, right? You should actually just develop linking ideas, synthesize information, and engage in academic discourse or academic conversation, right? It should be something that contributes to whatever field that you're working in, right? Rather than just, is the sky blue? Yes or no? arguable. So again, this should be maybe a debatable position, right? While you do use accepted facts to often support your argument, the question itself should be debatable, right? So again, for instance, if you wanted to make a thesis statement such as, or if you had a research question that was like, what are the effects of, let's say, social media platforms on American teenagers, right? That could be the question, then you develop into a thesis statement such as, social media sites like Twitter and Facebook negatively impact the self-esteem and let's say, I'm trying to come up with one off the top of my head, the self-esteem and body positivity of, American teenagers, right? That could be arguable, right? Because there are people who do agree or think that, oh, well, social media is just, the internet, right? It doesn't impact you, just log off, right, if it bothers you. But that's not true, right? That can be a debatable position. Be assertive, so have a clear position, right? Don't say things like, well, it maybe could be this, or some people say this, or perhaps it could be this, or I believe it could be this, but I'm not sure, right? Be assertive, right? If I was to come in here and say, oh, well, I maybe can teach you how to write, I think none of you would trust me, right? You gotta be assertive, right? Say, hey, in this paper, I will argue, right? You gotta be assertive, state your position. And it's gotta be evidence-based, right? Well, I'm sure you all have good beliefs and morals and value systems, right? Try to get one that's evidence-based, right? It's easier to, have facts to back up evidence-based arguable claims rather than a belief, right? So for instance, if your thesis was all criminals go to hell, right? That you'd have difficulty finding evidence, right? It's more of a belief system, and it's also, assuming all criminals are bad people, which we know that some people are wrongfully imprisoned, as well as would indicate that your audience is Christian, which may not be the case, as well as a particular type of Christianity. Some Christians do not believe in hell. So just try to, come up with something that would be more evidence-based, that could still be in the same ballpark. So, what I was discussing, right? A topic and a comment, right? That's what a working thesis needs. So, Fayetteville State University should move to a 4-day work week. Fayetteville State University would be our topic, right? That's the topic of our paper. The comment would be, should move to a 4-day work week, right? Now, again, it's not perfect, right? I gotta give some claims as to why I think this, but this would be enough of a working thesis that you can move on to the drafting stage, right? So you can get out of pre-writing and go ahead and start putting things down, right? And as you start writing it out and doing research, you then may come up with 3 reasons why you say this, right? Why you're arguing this. Now, a thesis statement, which is what you should have by your final paper, would be something like this. Fayetteville State University should move to a 4-day work week because increasing students' workloads on Mondays through Thursdays will make it more difficult for them to excel in their studies, will impact their extracurricular activities, and will not save the institution enough money to justify such an action, right? So here we have the topic, Fayetteville State. We have the comment, should move to a 4-day work week. But then I give reasons for that, right? That because, which the first one would be, it makes it more difficult to excel. It impacts their extracurricular activities. And again, it's not going to save enough money really to justify, not doing this, right? So again, those are my 3 reasons in support of that claim. That's what a thesis is, right? It's giving me a claim and some supporting main claims, right? And each of those main claims, like for instance, will make it more difficult for students to excel in their studies, right? That would be body paragraph 1. The next one would be body paragraph 2 and body paragraph 3, where you really dig deep into those claims and really justify what it is that you mean by that, right? But the thesis is just introducing your audience to your argument, right? So it's got a topic, a comment, and 3 reasons why. And again, it doesn't have to be 3 reasons, but, for our purposes and for most of your papers, it probably will be. So the planning stage, right? So once you've got a good working thesis at this point, right, and you've already brainstormed your ideas, now you can outline your paper, right? So where do things need to go, where they need to go, right? And probably you do intro, body paragraph 1, 2, 3, and conclusion, right? Now again, this isn't all papers, but likely this is the way you're going to structure yours, right? instead of doing something as simple as that, why not get more complex and more specific, right? So break these down even further, right? It can help you when you're drafting. So for instance, in your introduction, you know you need an opening line, you know you need to mention your topic, and you know you need to have a working thesis or thesis statement, right? Fill those in, right? 1 to 2 sentences at least, just to get you started before you start writing. In your body paragraph 1, you know in your body paragraphs you need an opening line, a topic sentence, supporting evidence, elaborating on that evidence. How does it relate to your argument? More supporting evidence, right? Because again, one piece of evidence isn't going to justify everything, right? You usually need additional pieces of evidence to help support that. Elaborations, and then some final thoughts, what we should take away, and a transition, right? And you do these for each of your body paragraphs. And then a conclusion, right? You need an opening line, you need to restate that thesis, you need to summarize your findings or your, what you want your audience to take away. And then either just some ending statements or a call to action, right? Maybe you want your audience to do something. So get more specific when you outline, right? Make it to where you're going from something as simple as that, where you might have more trouble drafting and might forget to do something, to something like this, where you know you need these elements in it, you sort of give yourself 1 to 2 sentences, and then you actually start writing it out. Storyboarding can also be useful. I don't personally do storyboarding, but some students like it, where instead of typing this out, what they do is they make sticky notes with opening sentence, thesis statement, supporting evidence, and they write it on a sticky note, or they write it on note cards, and they physically move them to where they need to go. That can be helpful, especially if you're a visual learner and you would like to be more hands-on with your learning. This can be a really good way, especially if you color code it, right? Your note cards or your sticky notes are, different colors for different things that you need, right? Or maybe you make everything for body paragraph 1 green and body paragraph 2 blue and the third one pink, what have you. That could be very useful to some of you. So, when you're actually drafting, right, make sure that at the end, right, the nitty-gritty of that paragraph consists of unity, development, and coherence. Unity is, again, each paragraph should have a topic sentence that calls back to your thesis statement, right? So, for instance, if I was doing the Fayetteville State 4-day work week argument, right, and I said my first body paragraph was that by limiting how many days we have, students will be able to excel more in their studies, right? Maybe that's what I'm arguing, right? If we have 4 days, students will be able to will do better in school, right? So, my topic sentence, again, the first few lines in that body paragraph need to say, hey, one reason we should move to a 4-day work week is because students would excel more in their studies if they had more time to actually complete those studies, right? So, a topic sentence, right? Unity. You want to always connect each body paragraph back to that main argument, right? This way we can follow your logic. Unity is something that's crucial in your paper, right? So if you think that you're sort of referencing back to your thesis too much, you probably actually aren't, right? Make sure that each of your body paragraphs mentions and ties back to your main argument. And this is usually going to be done in the beginning of your body paragraphs, right? Because you need to introduce what this paragraph's about, how it relates to your argument. Development. So, again, development is essentially your taking these general ideas and you're getting more specific with them, right? So, for instance, if using the last argument, Fayetteville State University should move to a 4-day work week because students would better excel in their studies, right? That's very generalized. After those, opening lines, I would give evidence, right, to support that argument, right? Maybe I find a study that shows that, students who only go to school 4 days out of the week tend to have higher grades in the same fields or the same areas, such as math, compared to students who go 5 days a week, right? So, make sure that you develop these arguments for each paragraph, right? You went generalized and then you get specific, right? And that's logically how a lot of humans work, right? Either we get very specific and then we generalize it, or we generalize it and then we get specific, right? Find a good balance of that. Your paragraph shouldn't just be very vague. They don't tie back to the argument. They don't give evidence to develop those ideas. Make sure that you utilize evidence to sort of support your argument and get it specific. Coherence. So again, another word for coherence that you've probably heard is flow. Does it flow well, right? Some ways to sort of achieve good flow in your writing is moving from the general to the specific, right? That's what we just talked about, right? So for instance, if you're writing, I don't know, if for some reason you needed to document the history of the Civil War, right? You wouldn't, start in the middle of the Civil War, jump to the beginning, jump to the end, jump back to the middle, right? That humans don't typically think that way, and it'd be really confusing. Usually you'd either go from the top to the bottom or from the bottom to the top, right? So make sure you sort of think of those things as you're writing your paper. Repetition of important key terms, ideas, or concepts, right? So if you're talking about colorism, mention colorism numerous times. Even if you think you're getting repetitive, the more you mention key terms and you repeat those ideas or concepts, the more likely your audience will remember them, right? So again, as we said in the beginning of each paragraph, refer it back to your main argument, right? Again, that repetition reminds your audience what the argument is, how it's related, etc., etc. Use transition. So again, towards the end of each paragraph needs to start to move into the next idea, right? You don't want it to just, abruptly cut, right? Move those ideas fluidly into the next idea, right? Or you could even, do something as simple as, while going back to the 4-day work week example, right? While moving to a 4-day work week would help students excel in their studies, that's not the only thing that's not the only argument in support of a 4-day work week. And then that would be the end of that paragraph, right? And then the next one would be, another reason we should move to a 4-day work week is because blah, 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 right? So again, sort of integrating your language in a way that helps it transition fluidly and naturally. And then using parallel structures. Parallel structures, again, aren't a make or break, but they do help with coherence. So what I mean by parallelism is what we see here, right? Mary likes to hike, to swim, and to ride a bicycle, right? Or something like Mary likes to hike, swim, and ride a bicycle, right? Again, they're all in the same sort of format, right? Something that wouldn't be parallel would be something like Mary likes hiking, swimming, and to ride a bicycle, right? If it was parallel, it should be and riding a bicycle, right? So what happens and why you should try to keep parallel structures is because when you break parallel structures, it tends to add emphasis on something. So for instance, hiking and swimming, because they're in the same tense, right? It makes them seem like equals. And when you break that, it seems to add more emphasis to this riding a bicycle. And that might not have been your purpose, right? You may not have intended to do that. Maybe you want them all to be seen as equally valid points, right? When you break the parallel structure, it does make that look like the odd man out. And your audience might focus more on that point than the other points because they're like, oh, well, that one's obviously different, so it must be more important, right? So if you don't intend for that to happen, try to keep parallel structures, right? But if you do intend to do that, be aware that you're doing it, right? So hopefully you learned something about the writing process and how to plan and draft in those pre-writing and drafting stages specifically. If you have any questions, as always, feel free to ask me. Other than that, I will see you all next time. Thank you for listening.